So I pre-ordered 007 First Light, and I am incredibly excited to play this game, for mainly one reason. This game reminds me a lot of Uncharted, a game series I love deeply because of the memories I have of playing Uncharted 3 on the PlayStation 3 with my brother. This game reminds me of so many Uncharted-like qualities: the perspective, the suave and slick character, hybrid combat with fists and guns, the driving sequences, explosions, shady antagonists, and everything looks so good. Haven't even gotten to the bluff ability yet. Holy crap, you mean I can lie my way through security? I am so excited for just the sheer amount of creative freedom being given to the player. The only downside is, so far, sadly he's British. Sadly, I'm not a game journalist, so I never get to play any early copies or write my articles on why I disliked my experience with this or that. But apparently to so-called video game journalists, they have the inability to pretend. I was scrolling away and saw someone talk about this article not even 5 minutes ago, and he kind of skimmed over the main parts of the article that make me think that this guy's a total loser and just doesn't understand what video games are about. So it starts off pretty normal and boring until he says, quote, "What if James Bond just shouldn't be a video game protagonist?" Okay, I'm open to different perspectives. I've listened to worse ideas. Let's hear your reasoning. He then goes on to say, GoldenEye for the N64 is a classic. You're also not really James Bond in it. What? Quote, "You're a hand with a pistol in it. And sometimes in cutscenes, Pierce Brosnan's face, the character of Bond, existed as a lore reason for your gun to emit bullets. What are you talking about?" So, because a game is set in the first perspective, you're not really Master Chief. You're Master Chief's forearms holding guns. This makes no sense. Are you saying that if First Light was set in the first-person perspective that you would think you weren't really James Bond? The first-person perspective was to make you feel more like the character you were playing because you were inside the character. Pause. What about the new Indiana Jones game that is set in the first person? Are you saying you aren't really Indiana Jones? You're the hands that are punching the Nazis. The hand is connected to the character, not separate because, well, I can't see the face, so it just must not be there. I'm just a disembodied hand shooting a gun. It's called using your imagination. If you had one, this wouldn't be that difficult. He goes on to say, but games that try to make you feel like James Bond, that put you in his actual shoes and attempt to embody him as a character, they fall down. Admittedly, a lot of them are simply not very good video games, but also, I think the very nature of Bond is that he is a creature of cinema. He just doesn't quite fit into games. Well, admitting that GoldenEye is a classic immediately contradicts this statement, so you haven't really proven that James Bond doesn't belong. You're just saying that games derived from movies have a tendency to suck, which is true. I'm not going to argue that. They're mostly cash grabs and terrible. I mean, look at the Spider-Man games. Old ones, not the new ones. Chill out.
Help! Please! Someone! I'm going to die!
Vice versa also exists. Video game characters don't always transfer well onto the big screen. But what about the latest 2 Mario movies? Those are getting great reviews. So why is Mario okay to switch from medium to medium, but because now that it's James Bond, it sucks? Moving on, he says, part of this is, well, he's annoying. This might scan differently to non-Brits, or indeed to anyone who doesn't share my particular brand of class psychosis, but James Bond is an insufferable public school dickhead. He's a rowing club Tory boy through and through, and he comports himself like a man who has a right to the earth and everybody on it. Isn't this exactly why people love James Bond? He's a cocky super spy. He has high-class tastes because so do the villains. And again, you are making statements with absolutely no evidence or explanation other than, well, I feel this way, so you must as well. Look, I don't care if James Bond reminds you of someone you don't like, but he's a fictional character. He's not real, and you are playing as him. So apparently you think that you are a dickhead. Maybe that's why you didn't like him. Also, public school? Do you mean private school? Because I went to public school, albeit in America, but there were no James Bond types there? Do you think that public schools only have rowing clubs? Do you think that public school makes dickheads with cocky attitudes? Because I'd argue the opposite. Anyway, he goes on to say, which is quite fun for 90 to 120 minutes of a movie where he is surrounded by numerous other people who can roll their eyes at him whenever he opens his mouth. In a video game for 10, 20, 30, 40 hours, less so. And especially less so in something like The First Light, where a lot of his cocky one-liners and general swagger are delivered to empty rooms and enemy corpses where no one save the player can tell him to give it a damn rest. More of the same, we get it. You don't like James Bond. That's fine. But again, plenty of people love James Bond because of these reasons. Because he can be surrounded by enemies and come out on top with a cocky attitude. Let's point out my favorite comic book character ever, Spider-Man. And I loved him before the movies so everyone else can suck it. But Spider-Man is a character with the same attitude of mouthing off while in a fight, or even after a fight. So does Deadpool. He's literally called the Merc with the Mouth. So to sum it up real quick, you think that James Bond doesn't belong in video games because he does one-liners and you don't like him. Okay, none of those points validate your opinion, which is at this point poorly thought through and poorly argued for. Moving on, he goes on to say, quote, but also part of his charismatic arrogance is that he is suave and unflappable. Well, great, good for him. I'm not suave and I flap at the slightest inconvenience. I simply don't fit into him. Should probably reword that. Hey, that is my joke. Whenever I, as Bond, fumble a counter, miss a shot, or try to duck into cover only to fling myself headfirst into a desk lamp, I break the entire spell of the character. Are you trying to say that James Bond doesn't mess up? He doesn't miss? He doesn't get caught? He's a perfect character that never makes a mistake ever? That is a stupid and entire misrepresentation of the character. First, let's point out that whenever there is a character that is flawless, that people don't like the character, because then we get every Steven Seagal movie ever. It is poor writing, and never taught to anyone in a writing degree ever that you should make your main character completely unrelatable and make him a perfect human being that never misses, never makes a mistake, never this, never that. I'm sorry, all I can think about right now is James Bond getting strapped to a chair and getting his nutsack smacked with a leather bag. Because if James Bond was perfect, was undefeated, was unbeatable, he would have never been in that situation, no matter how homoerotic it was. I haven't even gotten to the point where you admit you're a clumsy, self-conscious, low self-esteem mess. Have you ever thought that maybe you could just pretend? It's what we did as kids. It's certainly what I did as a kid. Hell, I still do it now. It's just in a different context. You weren't actually Nathan Drake in the jungle gym. You weren't actually the cowboy or the Indian playing cowboys and Indians. And I wasn't Optimus Prime, and I couldn't turn into a truck, but boy did I try. But it was still fun. And it's what people do when they play video games, or at least I do. Maybe I do want to be Indiana Jones, or Mario, or Sly Cooper, or even James Bond. Just because you can't imagine yourself being suave doesn't mean someone else can't. Just because you have a coffee stain on your shirt doesn't mean you can't pretend to be James Bond. Because the guy in the booth next to you might have been pretending, and he's got 2 coffee stains. To finally finish this poorly thought out garbage, we finish with, quote, one moment in particular in my time with First Light made me think this. 007 is doing righteous battle with a villain. Normal thing for 007 to do. During the fight, he grabs a teacup from the sideboard and drives it hard into his opponent's face. At this point, he says something which I did not write down because I was in the middle of fighting a guy, so my recollection may be fuzzy, but I believe James Bond, 007, on His Majesty's Secret Service said something along the lines of, time for tea. I posit to you is a man who will say time for tea or something close to it upon assaulting some sort of international terrorist with a cup, the kind of person in whose head you want to spend 40 hours. He is not, but turning him into a man who doesn't say that would make him not Bond. So you may have noticed that at the very beginning of this video, I stated that this game reminds me a lot of Uncharted, because I believe that Nathan Drake from Uncharted has a lot of qualities that are being described here, but in the context of it being James Bond. Nathan Drake is suave. Nathan Drake does many of the same things that are happening in the trailers and assumingly in the gameplay, but because he doesn't do one-liners, That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Because you don't like James Bond, he doesn't belong in video games. But someone like Nathan Drake, which is not a mirror copy, but very similar, that's okay. We're not going to point that out, we're going to point this out. You have made a statement of which you believe that no one can like corny one-liners because you don't like them. This is not journalism. This is making assumptions and baseless statements where they only ring true to your own personal opinion of James Bond's character. Just because you don't like James Bond doesn't mean that everyone else doesn't as well. Because I like James Bond for the reasons that you don't, because at least he isn't French. Thanks for watching. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go Google the difference between shaken and stirred martinis and be utterly disappointed in the answer.